All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this presentation of Freakin Control for Control Freaks. We're going to wait just a couple seconds as people continue to trickle in here, and then we'll get going. So, again, thanks for joining us here for this presentation of Freakin Control for Control Freaks. My name is Grant Cernick, and I am the head of sales and marketing at Third Wave. Third Wave is a software platform designed to help control freaks like yourself in the international supply chain space manage their trade compliance and transportation operations from one centralized platform. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about what does control mean and who are we designed for. And so today we're going to talk about some of the challenges that relate to this. And just a little housekeeping to start. So this is being recorded, and we will send you a recording and the slides of this presentation, so don't feel as though you need to be scribbling notes. We'll probably send out a thank you email tomorrow, so please expect that. If you don't get it and you're interested in the recording and the slides, then shoot me an email. My email address is grant@thirdwave.co. And my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So again, thank you for joining us. This presentation, we decided to do as a webinar because I gave this presentation at the ICPA conference that took place not long ago. And it was a full house, and there weren't enough seats for everybody, and it was standing room only. And so it seemed to resonate as a title, especially as it relates to people that are professionals in the trade compliance world, where being a control freak is a real benefit to that function. So just keep in mind, an in-person presentation sort of operates a little bit differently. And so a couple of the slides are questions that I asked the audience, and it's not exactly the same environment here. So it'll be a little bit different. So I want you to just think to yourself, if you would consider yourself a control freak, and what does being a control freak mean to you? And if you're not, maybe think a little bit about, well, why are you? And you're in an area, if you're in trade compliance, you're in an area that requires a certain level of control if you are responsible for some trade compliance elements. And I would expect that you're probably pretty good at your job. So if you don't consider yourself a control freak, I guess that must mean that you figured a certain set of things out that allow you not to be or perhaps you're just totally delinquent, but I don't think that that's the case. So I think that there's some benefit to thinking about, if you don't see yourself as a control freak, what is it that allows you to sit in that space? Because it's pretty stressful to be a control freak while knowing that you don't have things under control, or that you would like better control of your processes. So what does it mean to you to be in control? I want you to just take a couple seconds to think about it. You're either going to have a system that enables you to control the elements that you feel need to be controlled, or you're going to figure out on your own a way, a method of gaining control of your system. And that largely would entail, I would guess, Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or something like that, some kind of spreadsheet, which is a fantastic tool to enable you to manage your trade compliance or those elements of trade compliance that you think are important. Oh, again, this was a slide in the presentation. We were talking about what does it mean to be in control, or what do you think about when you hear the word control? And I want to highlight just a few of the points that are on here. And this is not for sure not an exhaustive list, but there are a few things that are sort of critical, and we're going to dive into a lot more of these things. And you could care about process, so knowing process is under control, understanding that certain steps have to be followed, and knowing explicitly that they've been done in a timely fashion. So being timely is another element there. Knowing when data is missing. So there is a huge panoply of data that is required to know and understand and be complete. And systematically, knowing when data is missing is a very difficult thing to achieve when you don't have a controlled process or controlled system. There are some very specific trade compliant things, like knowing shipments with anti-dumping or countervailing duties, which is a very specific challenge that some of you might deal with and some of you might not. But that can be a highly stressful thing that needs to be controlled, because if you mess up and don't identify those products that require anti-dumping, for instance, that could result in significant penalties to your organization. And then there's a whole set of these elements that are around supporting your stakeholders with information that they require and having that information at your fingertips. This is something that is a broad category of things, and knowing that you can support your stakeholders within your organization, and you are a choke point for the dissemination and understanding of information. This is something that when I talk about control, is certainly something that I believe you have to get better at, your ability to support your stakeholders. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So I want to take a very specific example as to what the goal of trade compliance is, and we'll focus on import at the start, where you have a commercial invoice, and the goal is to convert and understand the conversion of that commercial invoice into an ISF, an entry, and whatever PGA filings you have. And so the way you have to do that in a way that is timely, correct, and explicit. And oh, by the way, you need to do it consistently, which means you have to be timely, correct, and explicit every single time this function is done, is your goal. And so it's not okay to, or you are deficient if you are timely, correct, and explicit sometimes. That is suboptimal as far as what you are trying to do. What you are trying to do is to consistently do this set of things. And if you are trying to do it consistently, it means systematically you need to be able to do it. And most of you do not have the infrastructure or the process or the data repository to consistently manage and convert this information consistently. What it requires is that you, of course, understand the regulations and the rulings, and you're ensuring that products are properly classified and I'm not just talking about HTS or on the export side, schedule HTS schedule, BCCN or other types of classifications. But you also care about PGA data. We talked a little bit about ADD and CVD, how that's important. There are other things that are also important as to the appropriate capture of information and data, manufacturers, MIDs, registration numbers, things of that nature that need to be recorded and controlled. You care about having the supportive documentation that would substantiate whatever information you're going to share with CBP or the partnering government agencies. And finally, you want some ability to control your process holistically if you're using a broker, with your broker. If you're not using a broker and you're self-filing, you need some way of overseeing that holistic process. So let's take a look at what a standard customs process looks like. And I think what you'll agree is that this mostly matches your process if you use a customs broker. So we start with your shipment pack, which consists of a bill of lading, a packing list, and a commercial invoice minimally. There could be other documents as well. And those documents will be sent to your customs broker, which is in the bottom swim lane. And the customs broker now knows that a shipment's about to be executed and they need to file an entry for that. And what they're going to do is they're going to take a product dictionary or HTS code database that you manage as the importer of record in this middle swim lane that gets sent on a periodic basis to keep consistent with your broker. They're going to match the products from the product dictionary and the HTS codes there with the product in the commercial invoice, put it through some kind of black box system. You don't really know what happens there because you're not part of that process. And the output of that is a customs entry, which gets filed with a CBP. And you're going to get that output sent to you. And again, as a trade compliance professional, your job now is to do an audit, which is a whole bunch of manual processes to ensure that the output, which is the 7501, matches the codes that were provided in the product dictionary and the documents that were provided by your vendor and your forwarder. And all of this is done in a manual process. And your job is to audit, which is designed to surface problems within the process, within the black box customs process, where mistakes are made such that you understand what is going on and can systematically fix those problems as you see that they are systematic problems. So what happens in that black box? So let's walk through a very, very simplified example where we have a standard simplified commercial invoice, got 4 products on it. And what is going to happen? What is a broker going to do with this commercial invoice? So via our product dictionary or item master, we're going to see that these 4 products actually have HTS codes. Again, for simplicity, a couple of these are X's and a couple of them are Y's. And by virtue of having this conversion, which you're responsible for, right? You are your broker, and certainly not your vendor. Your broker now is able to utilize this HTS code to do lookup, to get a set of data or information that is important or for doing the conversion. So they care about duty rates. What is the duty rate? Are there any PGAs that happen to be required or potentially required for this HTS? And what are the units of measure, the customs unit of measure, which oftentimes are strange ways of reporting. They certainly wouldn't be the operational units, so dozens in this instance, perhaps. And by virtue now of having the lookups accomplished, you're now able to do calculations. They are now able to do calculations to calculate the duty and the report the quantity and the appropriate reporting measure, so dozens in this instance. They're able to calculate fees like the MPF and the HMF. And these are somewhat simplistic, again, in this example, because, here we're just doing a straight multiplication, but there are mins, there are maxes that are required at the entry level for certain types of fees. And the last step that they're going to do is your broker is going to do is that they're going to aggregate like for like HTS code, such that HTS code X is summarized and HTS code Y is summarized. And they do this for legacy pricing reason, really, which is that the broker oftentimes charges you based on the number of lines on an entry. And you, as the customer, say, I want to minimize my costs. And so the broker then aggregates the lines, but the cost, aside from just the price that you pay, is that you lose resolution as far as line items go. And most brokers, unless you are insistent with them, and that could have an increased price, to report each product line independently on the customs entry, the likelihood is they're not doing it, and you're getting a HTS code line summary when it gets reported, which is the X's line here, not the product line detail. And so what happens is that this commercial invoice and the customs entry filing are totally indistinguishable or non-explicit. How do you get from X, or from the table on the left to the table on the right, which is the customs entry? Now, I want to be clear. The data on the right correctly matches the data on the left. But the challenge here is that it is not explicit how you got the summary, the entry summary from the commercial invoice. And this creates a very, very significant problem for you, because your job, your obligation as customs sees it, is that not only does it need to be accurate and correct and submitted timely and all of those things that we just talked about as what the goal was of your the goal of your trade compliance operations is, it also needs to be explicit. So you have to know that it's right. And this is where the audit comes in, and the audit is, well, it's your check that you have to replicate the work your broker did to come up with the same answer. That's problematic for two reasons. One is it requires you to do a heck of a lot of work. Let's imagine that your broker charges you $100 to do a customs entry. Well, they charge you $100 because it's $100 worth of work, or if it's not $100, maybe it's $90 or $95 to do a lot of work to create this customs entry. For every entry that you audit, it's costing you approximately the same amount of money to redo the work to verify that it's done properly. So it's a very expensive task to do audit. But other problem is that you're always auditing a subset of your total entries. So when, you should have a general perspective on things, that things are never quite as good as you think they are. And when you audit and you find errors here or there of a certain type, I want you to understand that you have not found all the errors on all your entries. You have found a small subset of errors that are meant to represent a type of error that could exist, and that your problems ultimately probably much greater than you think they are. Okay, now, and this is one of the main areas for stress, is because you actually know this intuitively, but there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And the only time you're going to get penalized for it is if you get audited, or you get CF28 or worse, CF29 or something like that, and a light from CBP starts being shined on your outputs and then on your process, and then you realize that you have real problems. And this creates a hugely and highly stressful exercise. And my goal, or our goal at Third Wave, and our collective goal, I would hope as an industry, is that we want to minimize the amount of stress that we collectively have in our life. And so the goal needs to be able to systematize this process to make things explicit, such that things are always correct and always accurate, so that we don't need to be stressed. We know we have good process. What is, if we look at it a slightly different way, the overarching challenge? So this is the iron triangle of compliance, where most of you who are sitting here listening to this conversation are big enough that your organization have an ERP. And within that ERP are orders. So whether it's a purchase order or a sales order or a transfer order, it doesn't really matter. You have orders that are demands for product. You have the products themselves defined within your ERP in a limited way. And just a point here, I often speak to people and they say, oh yeah, we keep all of our item master information in SAP or SAP GPS or whatever the Oracle and Oracle PM equivalents are, or in Microsoft or whatever your ERP is. Yeah, we our data there. Let's be clear as to what you're doing. Okay, if you fall into this category, you are keeping a very small subset of trade compliance data in your ERP, if that's what you're doing. Okay. The data required to support customs compliance is way greater than what you are able to store in your ERP, certainly. And if you have GTS or a compliance-focused add-on to your ERP, the odds is that it's expensive and so difficult to configure that you probably are also not controlling your data sufficiently within that application. Okay, which means that you probably have spreadsheets somewhere that is doing the bulk of the work that you have within your function. So this is the ERP. It is not designed for compliance. It has a certain set of data that is important to you, and but it is but one source of information. Transportation, or the transportation process, which might or most likely is not controlled in any meaningful way within your organization, especially on international shipments, you have a much higher likelihood of having a domestic TMS that might play a little bit in international transportation management, but almost certainly not, and doesn't do it properly or sufficiently. But within that transportation stack, there are shipments, and what is the position of the shipment, and what containers might or might not exist. I mean, they don't need to be containers; they can be air shipments, pallets, and things of that nature. And then accounts: who are your service providers? Who's the stuffer? Who's the consolidator? Things of that nature, which are important for managing a customs process. All of that information is not stored in the ERP. It's stored at in the transportation function somewhere, somehow, whether it's on spreadsheet or not at all. Maybe it's not stored at all, but it's certainly stored in a document that you have access. And finally, you have compliance and the things that are important compliant, which are obviously the HTS codes and duty rates and countries of origin and data related to your PGA information. And you have entities which are perhaps equivalent to accounts, or the accounts are a subset of the entities that you care about, because the entities are also your vendors and your customers and individuals that you might do trades with, you might be trading with. And these are three different perspectives. The ERP, the transportation, and compliance are three different perspectives on exactly the same things. So orders is an ERP-centric view of HTS codes are a compliance view of products. Orders are also a ERP view of shipments needing to be moved or products needing to be moved from point to point. Shipment is a transportation view of those things that need to be moved point to point. And so the point here is that all of these things that you care about from a compliance perspective are different views or perspectives on exactly the same data. And so now, if you want to be able to create the outcomes that are beneficial to your organization from a trade compliance perspective, which are, managing an ISF process, managing a customs entry process, managing your PGA filings are correct, audit or reconciliation, support your stakeholders from a shipment status or a visit perspective, or when do I need to file my customs entries? When do they need to be done? When does an ISF need to be filed? We haven't spoken at all about ISFs, and that customs is now starting to penalize a whole host of different things as it relates to the ISF. They've been threatening for 20 years, and it seems as though recently they're making good on that promise to start penalizing companies that are delinquent in their responsibility for security filings. So all of these things require that the information gets understood and controlled such that the ERP, the transportation and compliance perspectives of data are consistent. A product is seen one way in the ERP. A product is seen a different way in compliance, and a product is seen a third way in transportation if it's seen at all. An order, a purchase order, if we're talking about imports, is seen in one way from an ERP, is seen a different way in compliance, and is maybe not seen at all in transportation. But these are all important entities and objects that need to be understood and need to be able, if you're trying to keep your compliance data consistent with your ERP data and transportation data such that everything is supportable, you need to be able to translate the information from one perspective to the other and back. And this is what your job or your goal is within the trade compliance organization, is to figure out how to build a system that enables this. So the challenges that relate to all of these things that we've been talking about really do fall into three different categories. So the first category challenge that you're going to face is a platform control challenge. And if you don't have a systematized way of managing your platform or everything that is happening within your organization, then you're not going to have process support, and you're not going to be able to have the appropriate data validations that you need. You're not going to have the appropriate places to house the data that's important for you as a trade compliance professional in your organization more broadly to control and understand. You're not going to understand history, who touched what when, who classified a certain certain product, why did they classify it a certain way. This history control is very difficult to have if you're working off spreadsheets. Except management, which is what everybody is driving towards. How do I know what I need to deal with and what I don't need to deal with, and especially what I don't need to deal with? That's a challenge that the only way you're able to solve is when you have a platform designed to highlight those things that are important and de-highlight those things that are not important. Ensuring that you have a holistic process that you can now, instead of auditing specific transactions, or auditing the entire process to ensure conformity and things of that nature. And finally, a place to house your documents, and that all of this stuff is together in one spot from a platform perspective. Data control is one of the other category challenges that you're going to find. So how do I know that HTS codes have a home, that all of my PG data has a home, that as CBP or regulations change, that I'm made aware of the changes and what that impact is to my data, customs rulings, things of that nature. These are all around data and data control. And you have to, some of the challenges fall into that. And then finally, process control, which is around managing your actual operational processes, whether it's ISFs, customs, or PGAs, or your reconciliation program. How do I know what needs to be reconciled? When do I have the information to actually finalize my reconciliation? Do my document control? Did I get the documents I needed them? How do I manage my vendors and things of that nature? Communicating with your external or internal stakeholders, understanding timing. When do I need to file an ISF, file an entry? When can I issue a delivery order? Things of that nature. These are all around process. And so the problems that we have fall into either data control, process control, or platform control. And while it's easy and what you're driving towards is like, well, maybe if I could just focus on data control, I'll get further ahead. Or if I can focus a little bit on process control, I'll be able to improve here. Or if I can try to systematically improve in some way, shape, or form, I can maybe hit some of these platform control problems. You can only make so much progress when looking at these things independently. The goal is to be able to manage these things collectively, so that you're now able to improve everything together. And, ultimately, this is what Third Wave was designed. So I want to just quickly highlight a few examples of data control, process control, and platform control, so that it brings concreteness to, well, certainly how Third Wave deals with things, but how these challenges, or solving these challenges, leads to better outcomes within your compliance organization and your company as a whole. So when we're talking about managing data, what we care about is really understanding that we have a place for all of the data that's important, and a certain, all of the meta information around that data that helps you control your process. So, for instance, in this example, we have a product that has a tariff. That tariff has an effective date of a certain effective date and a certain effective end date, potentially. Okay, if we're talking about a certain HTS code that that's historic, this one just happens to be a more recent one, but if it's historic, it's possible that it was valid from January 1, 2021, and all of a sudden stopped being valid on December 31st, 2023. Now, any entry that fell within that period of time for the certain product, that would have been fine. If you're doing audit against those products historically, well, that's certainly a valid code. But if it expired on December 31st, 2023, well, that HTS code should not be used anymore. And if you are still using it, then that creates a problem. And so effective dates, which are things that almost nobody thinks about, is really important. And certainly if you're managing on a spreadsheet, those are elements, this metadata that is important is certainly not easily controlled. If your product was subject to 301s, you want to be able to capture that. If it's subject to PGAs like FDA, there's data that's required to be able to report to the FDA when you submit your entry, and you need to be able to capture that. So whether it's a product code or a pack configuration, right? These pack configurations are totally separate when we're talking about FDA from how customs requires you to report on things. Okay. And so it's incumbent on you to understand that. And, I've spoken a lot in this presentation around the challenges related to customs and customs entries. But quite frankly, the challenge is if you have an FDA challenge or you have an EPA challenge or a Lacey Act challenge, these are challenges that are much more troubling for you than the customs data, which, yes, we all have a challenge with customs data, or we all have to concern ourselves with customs data, which makes it consistent across all of you. But that doesn't mean that it is the biggest challenge that everybody faces. And so when we're talking about FDA information, so whether FDA, ETB has its own set of complexity if you're dealing in wine and spirits or other, alcohol or tobacco products or things of that nature, there is a huge amount of complexity that the government has put in place around managing this data that you have to care about. It's all around data control and ensuring that you have the repository in a controlled way to understand the data that you need and understand when you don't have it so that you can get it in a timely fashion. Process control is a different thing where you care about how does a customs entry move through the process, understanding that you have all the information required and that you're able to support the process and understand when you can't, so that the exceptions can be highlighted to you or highlighted for you so that you can now engage to solve this process problem and keep the process moving. So in this is just one line of a customs entry. The data, as you can see, is similar to what I just showed you from a data control perspective, but now it's been integrated into the process because the customs entry is part of an overarching process. So the question is, do we have all of the information required to support this process? Do we understand when we don't, so that we can engage in the process to solve the problem? Can we measure how good we are at ensuring that all our data is prior to requiring its usage in the process so that it doesn't stop? How frequently does the process stop where we have to engage in the fire? Our goal is to eliminate fires. Eliminating fires reduces our stress. And my goal in particular is to operate in a very low stress environment, which really is antithetical to a lot of people that I speak with, where they operate in totally high stress environments because, well, they don't have data control and they don't have process control, and they don't have platform control. That necessarily creates an enhanced, heightened stress environment. We want to eliminate that. And finally, platform control is are those things that enable you to understand exactly what's happening in your process at a higher level so that you understand exactly where the processes are heading, where the dates are, where fires are occurring. How do you know where important things are? You'll note that chilies on a couple of these shipments, chilies in the third wave world represents product that is hot, and that they need to be expedited through the process. And so now everybody's made aware that from a platform perspective, these shipments need to be expedited through the process as best as you can. If you have several containers arriving at the port at the same time, these two containers need to be expedited and not the other ones. So this is platform control that allows you now to understand what's happening, not just from a trade compliance perspective, but also from a greater organizational perspective, and helping you support your stakeholders throughout the entire process. Just quickly, where this is sort of an analog to the previous slide that we had at the beginning of the presentation, where it was a black box with your customs broker. Now, well, it looks like there's a lot happening in the third wave world, and there is. Everything of the third wave swim lane has been totally cleaned up, where purchase orders now can flow into third wave, and we have an object for the purchase order object from an ERP. Commercial invoice information is able to be captured in third wave in automated fashion, and we have several tricks for enabling that. And we're able to ingest a commercial invoice and a packing list into third wave, and similarly, a bill of lading and advanced ship note notification are able to be ingested automatically, finishing with a warehouse receipt that is also able to be ingested. And we have the objects within the third wave environment to take these in as they are. We validate the data that is coming in to ensure that we understand all of the information. We understand the accounts that are on it, or the entities. We understand the product that are on the purchase order and commercial invoice and warehouse receipt and the packing list. We understand the relationships between the purchase order and the commercial invoice, the purchase order and the warehouse receipt, or the commercial invoice and the purchase order and the warehouse receipt. And we're able to control the entire holistic process to ensure that not just product is coming in, but it's being financially recognized through a commercial invoice, and it's being practically recognized from a warehouse feed to ensure if we ordered 100 widgets on an order, did 100 widgets come in on a packing list, and did we receive 100 widgets in a warehouse receipt? And similarly, when they came in, were they of a condition that is acceptable to us? And third wave now is dealing with all of the complexity around managing your product master, your account master, so the HTS codes and ID numbers and registration codes and things of that nature, such that third wave can convert all of the information from the operational view as it's being received into a trade compliance view and a customs perspective, which now allows you to create an ISF and create a customs entry. And so whether you intend to continue to use your customs broker and send them a totally validated data set so that they don't have to do any thinking and you eliminate the black box problem, or you choose to self-file your customs entries, all of this process is controlled and automated such that as long as you're managing your product and account masters, the system just automatically works and flows. So let's just take a step back and understand what are the challenges that are caused by the current process. So from a business outcomes perspective, you have lots of work in your current world, which means you have there's work, you have lots of audit, you have lots of communicating with your brokers, you have lots of back and forths and emails and validating documents and things of that nature. You have risk, both that you understand and that you don't understand. You have no idea what mistakes are being made or are not being made. Even if you audit, again, don't fool yourself into thinking that you understand what mistakes are being made. You will understand the category, minimally the category errors that are made through a process, but not specifically what the errors are. And as a result of that, you can't appropriately quantify what the risk is to your organization. You have a great deal of uncertainty where you don't have visibility into what is happening. This uncertainty creates a huge amount of stress within your world. You have a great deal of cost. So each entry on average, let's say it's $100 and an ISF is $20, $25, maybe $35, and maybe the entry isn't $100 if you're dealing in PGAs and lots of lines on a commercial invoice. It's not $100, it's dramatically more than that. If you have process control, you're able to dramatically reduce that, but we'll talk about the benefits in just a second. Your operational processes are totally disconnected, and that creates manual work. Again, going back to the top, disconnected processes create errors and manual work, and that's a problem. And you open yourself up finally to penalties where CVP is, of course, there are penalties on the entry if you're not doing that appropriately and you're missing anti-dumping and things that can be severe. But on things that is consistent across many of you, which is filing ISFs if you're doing ocean shipment, as we discussed, CVP is now starting to fine for non-compliance, and the penalties are not insignificant. And so the challenge here is if you let your vendors or your service providers file your ISFs on your behalf, when they make a mistake, it's your penalty. And you can try to recover those penalties from your vendors or your service providers. And if that's your strategy, I say good luck to you. What you want to get to is being able to control your process and ensure that you have an understanding and control of when your ISFs are being filed. You are certainly able to do that, and your penalties should be zero. So why do you want to automate? Well, in summary, we've discussed all of these things because you want to control your process, you want to control your data, and you want to control your documents. That's why. So automation and system control helps you do these things. The result is that you have less work. You need to audit less, which, as we discussed, is expensive. You need to have less systematic oversight. And that creates increased capacity for training, increased time for to evolve your compliance practices and get into things that are more sophisticated from a trade perspective. So I speak to a lot of companies that aren't doing duty drawback. Why? Because they don't have time to do it. Okay, and they're leaving millions of dollars on the table. Now, I understand why they don't have time to do duty drawback. They're doing the more, what would we call it, fundamental trade compliance activities, and it's taking up all their time. And by the way, if you wanted to get to duty drawback is 95% the data problem and 5% the regulatory conversion problem, if you will, creating that drawback entry. If you do not have your import and export data locked down, it is a rat hole to climb down if you're trying to get drawback. And finally, you have more time to work with your stakeholders. And one of the things that I like to stress whenever I talk is, as a trade professional, you guys are doing very, very complicated and arcane work that most of your organization has no idea what you do. And they need to. We need to, as an industry, figure out a way to inform the broader organization that we are not a problem, that we identify problems because they run counter to regulation. When we stop something, We're doing that because we're trying to save, we're trying to save problems. Okay. Running afoul of trade regulation is a serious problem. Okay. Now, if you're in operations, you just see this as, the trade compliance professional being a pain in my butt. Or if you're an executive sitting in some kind of ivory tower, you see the trade compliance person as just being a pain. The fact remains that I've met 0 people that are interested in being a thorn in somebody's side. What you guys are really focused on are keeping people out of trouble and how to keep product moving. But when regulations are skirted or not understood, you have a problem with that because you actually understand. Okay. And the goal is to spend more time working with your stakeholders so that they understand what their obligations are, and that they understand that you are working for them. You're their agent to keeping them out of trouble. And the more we can do that, the more time you have to work with these stakeholders, the easier your job is going to get just naturally, because they understand what you're gunning for. You're not a problem. Let's focus on reducing costs just for a second. If you look at what a customs broker's job is in that black box that we were talking about, it is to take a personal invoice and transform that into a customs entry and other PGA information. They charge you, let's say $100 for lack of a better number. And they charge you $100. It's not like they're rolling in like Benjamins, right? They have a hard job to do. And if they charge you $100, give or take, let's say they make $10 in margin on that $100, which is probably very high. They're making X on every entry that they file on your behalf, which means they have $90 in cost. Okay. The cost, to a large extent, has to do with manual entry of data. Now, if you're able to provide them validated data to their system, they have a system called an ABI, an automated broker interface. So they might use CargoWise or NetCHB or something of that nature. If you are able to provide to them a validated data set where they get to eliminate all their manual entry, you can save at least 50%. Okay. And for sure, you can save 50% because we have a number of brokers that have already committed. If Third Wave is processing their entries, if the customer is using Third Wave to process their entries, then they will drop their price from $100 to $50. That's without knowing anything about who the customer is. Now, it could be more than 50%. So if you are interested, or your organization is interested in eliminating cost, this is one way to do it, at least in a compliance perspective, from a compliance perspective. And the benefit that you experience is not just a reduction in cost, it's improved reasonable care, improved data control, improved process control. Risk reduction is about being able to systematize your work, be able to respond as required to different requests of stakeholders, whether that's the government or whether that's your leadership team, to be able to provide information that's required so that people can make more informed decisions, because decisions are inherently flooded with risk. If you can provide better information that reduces the cloud of unknown, your whole organization is able to reduce its risk. Okay, and so systematic validation to ensure correct data, systematic understanding of dates and activities, all go to providing more and clearer information to your organization, such that wherever decisions need to be made, the organizational risk is reduced. For some companies, speed matters. Okay. And so if you are automating your import process and speed matters, what that means is instead of a broker potentially filing your entry and then at some point informing you as to when it's been cleared by customs and been released by a PGA or something like that, you're able to file your own entries and immediately get a response as to what's going on and immediately order a delivery and immediately get your shipments delivered. And that can save 24, 48, 72 bucks or maybe more. Speed matters, or at least timeliness matters when you're dealing with ISFs now. We spoke about this quite a bit, right? You need to know when an ISF needs to be filed. You need to file it at time, and it matters because there are penalties. So if speed is important to you, automation should be one of the things you're looking at. The overarching point, and I can't stress this enough, is that when you control your data and you control your process and you have platform control, you have control. And again, this is Freakin Control for control freaks. You care about control. And in order to gain control, you need to have a holistic system that allows for that. Okay. And you want to automate because the control that you're seeking comes through that automation. So please feel free to reach out us here in Third Wave if you'd like to engage with us for any reason. Part of my job is helping people in your situation think about how to improve and what are the steps to getting there. So use me as a resource if you can to help think things through. This is what I do for a lot of time. I do thinking. It's not oftentimes what you spend your time doing, and so I might be able to asking whether or not you're a customer of ours or want to be a customer of ours. I can help you think through some of these things. So forward to speaking with you in the near future, and I want to thank you for attending the presentation. As I said at the beginning, the slides will be forwarded to you tomorrow, and so keep a lookout for that. And again, my email address is grant@3rdwave.co, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Oh, and one last thing. I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn. And so if you see me on LinkedIn, all my writing is related to the importer and exporter and the challenges you face and how to think about things. And so if you want to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn, that would be a great thing to do. Anyway, have a great day, guys. And I appreciate you sticking with us till the end here. Look forward to hearing from you soon.